I have to say this is not shocking what's happening. I literally said to Pierre Poilievre 3 years ago when COVID was happening, the federal government was just dumping money into the economy to try to keep the economy going and supporting people to serve and all sorts of other things. Um, I said to him in that room, I was like, you do understand that if we pump all this money into the economy constantly through all this, we're going to get inflation, record inflation through the roof.
You're watching or listening to The Crisis Storm. Many would say that there is a crisis on our streets. Homelessness, addictions, and social impacts affect business, community, and individuals every day. Crisis Storm is a longer format episodic video series and audio podcast series that digs into the root causes of our street and social displacements through conversations with thought leaders, responders, and solution finders in the hope that we can inform and engage better conversations around these crises that are dividing and polarizing our community. And today we are speaking to Colin O'Leary from O'leary and Associates about affordable housing as a crisis in community. You're watching The Crisis Storm, and this is episode 5 of season 2, or episode 10 overall. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit more about your background for the audience.
Sure.
O'Leary and Associates. What does O'Leary and Associates do?
It's hard to explain. It's kind of a joke, a running joke with my friends and family. But if I could really boil it down, largely most of what we do is we support the province or Canada and do community-led projects where there's usually interactions with other governments. So a lot of our work is navigating unsolved problems or uncharted territory between ministries, usually multiple ministries, and a lot of First Nations communities and bands in the province. So that keeps me very busy, and it spans a lot of very broad topics actually, but it's usually things that have never been solved before, and that's the sort of stuff I love. And so we solve it from the community up is always our approach. It's harder to do it that way, but you get phenomenal products. I do some other bits of work around disaster recovery, actually, from major disasters as well. So I've done stuff like the Economic Recovery Work Plan for the Elephant Hill wildfire or Lytton, for example. So usually it's the province hiring me to do that. But so it's always community-led solutions, though.
And it sounds like it always, in some way, touches on crisis.
Yeah, it kind of seems like that, I guess. Some of it's not. Some of it's maybe it's averting future crisis. Maybe I'll say it that way.
Good way to look at it. Today we're talking a little bit about affordable housing. Obviously we're in Kamloops, but this is a problem right across the country, if not North America or even internationally.
Absolutely.
If we look at our community just as a lab of what's going on everywhere else, what do you see in our community with regards to affordable housing? What is the crisis?
Yeah, well, Kamloops is very typical of a lot of, so I've talked to communities right across Canada and a lot of the work that I've done. And I should also mention a lot of this work that I've done has actually been on a volunteer capacity, actually not so much through my consultancy. And it's very similar. What you see is it's slightly different in some of the bigger epicenters, but the problem is that the full spectrum of housing in Canada is becoming unaffordable for people. So we're talking everything from entry level to, all the way up. It's impacting all sorts of different groups of people as well, like everyone from seniors, working families, new homeowners. There's also housing also impacts people that are street entrenched or looking to kind of transition off of that, so that we also have that supporting housing piece. Supportive housing can also be for seniors though as well, like people that need support in other ways, but right across the whole board, it's becoming less and less affordable. And something actually I'd talk about as well, which I think is really interesting, not a lot of people realize this, but It's not as big of a deal in the US. It is a big deal in a lot of parts of the world, but there's a really fantastic Globe and Mail article that came out a number of years ago. And what it did is it looked at Canada versus the US, and it looked at actually housing as a multiple of your income, of your salary. And we tracked pretty close to the US until about 2008. We had that kind of crisis that happened in 2008. And then for some reason, Canada completely diverged from the US. And the US kind of corrected, and it still was this multiple of, like, let's say, I'm going to make up numbers because I don't have the latest numbers, but it was like a 5 times multiple of your income in the US to buy housing. And Canada started growing to like 10 times and started growing past 10 times. So we just had this huge divergence for Canadians, and it's really pretty brutal. So if you look at like the amount of income we have to spend on our housing compared to other places like across the border, there's just this massive spread, and it's a problem. It's a huge problem in Canada.
Why has that happened? Why have we seen this huge divergence away from what typically is it's normal for us to kind of be a mirror of what's happening in the States to a smaller degree?
There's huge, so there's a pile of interesting factors. So it is very complex actually, and there's a lot of things. If I had to really boil it down, my own personal opinion is, well, there's a couple things. One of them is that the way that our banking system is working in Canada, and the way we work with like Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation, and we have stuff like mortgage-backed securities and other implements that are out there. What we've done is we have, especially since 2008, as Canadians, we've really de-risked our banks quite a bit because we didn't want our banking system to collapse. Everybody's afraid that was going to happen in 2008, especially down in the US. And so the government kind of tried to come in and backstop, and they're doing something similar right now. They're trying to come in and backstop so that we don't have like a collapse of a financial institution, we don't have a collapse of banks. One huge problem with that, so that didn't happen so much in the US, although it is kind of happening now recently. And it's funny, Kevin O'Leary actually got very vocal about this, unrelated to me, but another O'Leary out there talking about this stuff. But what I think, I heard a really interesting economist speak about this, and he said, because we have de-risked lending for banks, because we don't want them to fail, we want to be able to back them if they're going to fail, we have basically created a scenario where there's way more upside and there really isn't as much downside for our banks. And if you think about it, that creates a huge incentive for banks. If there's, let's exaggerate and say there's only upside for banks to do lending, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to shove money out that door. They're going to do as many loans as they can for as big as they possibly can, because that risk is lower now. And if they've got that backing, it's not that big of a problem. So I think what happened is we really started to kind of actually, as an externality of those decisions, we really created an environment where banks were actually making way more money available for housing than, the US has a completely different banking system, much smaller independent banks. They have huge risk of like defaulting, of bad loans, of they will just implode. They're not the monsters like we have in Canada. So they're, I think, more cautious, especially after 2008, more cautious of like the lending that they're doing. So when you dump a pile of money onto people and are like, no, you can't afford that bigger house that you thought you couldn't afford, you can afford it. And we're gonna, you should do that reno and you should do whatever else. So that causes people to spend more money on housing than they really probably should be. And we do have some checks and balances. I would argue they're not great. I'm glad we have something instead of nothing. So that's one factor. The other factor that came into play, so now you got way more money getting flown out there into housing, for more money into people's pockets to buy housing is actually what we have. So the other thing I would say is that we also, especially more recently, we have opened up our doors. We're actually Canada's accepting more immigrants around the world than we have ever accepted before. I saw a graph, it was absolutely incredible. And you know what? I'm a huge advocate for this. Like, I think that we need people to come to Canada. Canada's largely empty. We need people to fill jobs, to fuel our economy. It's super important. I think it's a really good thing. We can get a lot of talented people from around the world. The problem is that we just open the doors up to such a huge level, which again I think is good, but when you do that also, and we do that more than the U.S. So again, that comparison, you do that in a situation where we have limited housing already to begin with. There is a supply and demand impact, and it's not fair to actually. I think some government or some people would blame the immigrants coming over. I would actually say that that's poor policy on our government's behalf, actually, quite frankly. And it probably could have been done in maybe a better way. But I'm glad we have people coming over, but that's definitely a contributing factor. Nobody will argue that. And so you have a lot of money going out there, people getting really over leveraged because of like what's happening with their banking and our policies there. We got a whole bunch of extra people kind of getting dumped into our economy. To make things worse on top of all of that, we have COVID happens in the middle of this, curtail supply chain, huge supply chain impacts. Price of housing is largely like a kind of a market-driven price, so it's that supply and demand thing, right? Mm-hmm. So you got a couple factors that are putting like demand through the roof. You got a couple factors that are putting supply down. Bam, we've got housing prices going through the roof. Not only that, though, there's something else that people always forget about this factor is that there is a huge incentive, and the government's trying to tackle this right now, but like house flipping is actually a pretty big deal because it's not like those people on the reality TV shows that are really the problem, but actually there's a lot of contractors out there. It makes a lot of sense for them to buy an older, more affordable home, knock it down, rebuild it into a higher value home because they'll get more markup. They can realize more value on it. And so we are actually actively eroding our affordable housing supply. And replacing it with more expensive housing. So like all of these things, and there's more factors, but those are probably some of the key factors that have really just caused housing to go absolutely crazy.
So I know that you have got a lot to say about a passion of yours, and that is community land trusts. But before we get to that, do you see a market correction happening in the future, or is this just going to be a continuous trend without solutions being put in place?
Do you know what? I'm going to say that, and I've been saying this for a little bit, like, you know what? I was in a meeting with Pierre Poilievre in the Chamber boardroom about 3 years ago, small group of us, like 8 of us, and I literally, like, some of the stuff, I have to say, this is not shocking what's happening. I literally said to Pierre Poilievre 3 years ago when COVID was happening and the federal government was just dumping money into the economy to try to keep the economy going and supporting people to serve and all sorts of other things. I said to him in that room, I was like, you do understand that if we pump all this money into the economy constantly through all this, we're going to get inflation, record inflation through the roof. And the only kind of key levers we have in Canada to deal with the inflation is to raise central interest banks rates. So raise interest rates in Canada. And when you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to get people are going to start defaulting on their mortgages, and we're going to start to have problems with housing, and nobody's going to be able to afford it. I said that 3 years ago. And he basically gave me a blank stare. He didn't really, I was like, please tell me you have people looking at this and thinking about this. And I think a lot of people didn't think about things in the COVID. They were trying to react to something we'd never dealt with before. But what I would say is that, continuing my looking in a crystal ball and guessing, what I think is happening is that really it's going to take another 12 to 24 months before we really see the impacts of those raised interest rates. I think a lot of economists right now are killing me because they keep on proclaiming that we're going to have this soft landing that they've always talked about having that never happens. And what I foresee is, people are like, oh, inflation's under control. I think we're going to have sustained inflation for a while because what's going to happen is we're going to have what's called wageflation happening, where the cost of living has gone through the roof everywhere. We cranked up our interest rates to kind of slow it down. But now what's happening is that people can't afford to live. So, and you see it in the news, all these unions are stepping forward, everybody's looking for a raise because they can't live. That will also fuel inflation. So inflation is not going to just come right back down to where it was at. So we're going to have the sustained inflation, which means we're going to have sustained interest rates. And it takes a series of time. We know it takes like about 24 months minimum for increased interest rates to hit the market. Because we've only got something like a third of Canadians most Canadians are in fixed mortgages. Only about a third of them have renewed so far. So we've got 2/3 of the population aren't seeing this raise interest rates at all. So I think what's going to happen is that I hope we do have a correction. Because what the government keeps doing is the government keeps trying to kick the can down the road. And it's getting bigger. It's not going away.
To the next 4-year.
This is what's happening. And so now the talks, the more recent stuff I kind of alluded to in the news, is there's talks about the Canadian government possibly pressuring banks or allowing for like negative amortization on loans, on mortgages for people, just so they don't default. But what that means, I won't get into all the technical details of all that stuff. What it means is that I think we do need a correction. I think it's normal to have corrections. I think we've been trying to never have a recession for some reason, or a big recession for a while, but it's actually a part of the normal cycle. And if we don't let that stuff happen, we are just pushing the problems further down the road. They don't go away. So I kind of hope that we are coming into a correction. I think that like in the next, like I said, 12 to 24 months, like I would hope that we do have a bit of a cooling down effect, because if we don't, we're going to be facing problems like Hong Kong and like London, and like we're going to be looking at multi-generational mortgages. Like it's insane. Hong Kong makes sense. It's a little island. Canada is huge. We got piles of land. It makes no sense that we're having that stuff.
When we look outside of the urban centers, but I mean, they're not making any more land in Vancouver.
It's true.
Right? So Vancouver's pretty congested.
It's true. Although I'm traveling to Bangkok in a few days here, and I mean, you can fit you could fit 10 Vancouvers in one Bangkok. So there's a lot more density could happen, but I get what you're saying. It's not...
I don't think the codes and safety and all of those things are to the same standards in some of the foreign markets as well.
It's true. Could be very different. This is true.
Yeah.
But I guess the point is that, we should be doing better in Canada. We got a lot of space. We are blessed with a lot of space compared to other countries. We have a very stable government. We should be able to have more affordable housing for our people. I think that is my firm belief.
So, speaking about that, then I know that you've spent a lot of time working on trying to make some changes within government policy around making more efficacy in community land trusts. For people that don't know, could you explain what a community land trust is, and why are you so excited about this? Why are you putting so much time into this?
Okay. Good. Two good questions. So what a community land trust is, at its core, it's an entity. They've existed since the 60s. Actually, they're created through the emancipation of slavery in the U.S. as a way for slaves to own land without really owning land, or own a home without really owning the land, I guess would be the part of it. So they've been around for a long time. And really what they are is they're an entity that takes land out of the equation at its simplest form.
It almost sounds like a trailer court.
Kinda, yeah. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I guess that could be an interesting analogy. I never thought of it that way. But that's kind of the idea. Is it's a non-profit entity that's a trust, set up as a trust, and it holds land in a community for the community's benefit forever, for the community good. The community owns a chunk of land, not individuals. That's what a land trust ultimately is. And is driven, where it would be different from a trailer park, would be that it has a board of directors or volunteers from the community. And it's very responsive to community's needs. So it's not for an individual's gain or profit. It's for the community's benefit.
So when you say community, do you mean, in our case, the city would own it?
Nope. It would be a separate non-profit entity, and it would be much like a lot of entities we have in all across Canada. It's set up because it's a non-profit and because it's a trust and because it's a community land trust. There's very specific covenants and rules around it, what it can do and can't do. And it really is bound by this idea of only being able to hold land for community good and not making money off of it The other thing too, I would also say, is that it because it has a board that's made up of volunteers, none of them are personally profiting off of any decision. So what's going to happen is that they only have the community's interest in mind when they're represented there. They're not making decisions for their own benefit. And the fact that they're there as a volunteer means already they're looking to do something better for their community.
Interesting. Doesn't things fall apart though if something as complicated as looking after, let's say, a building that is built on this community land trust?
Yeah.
Assuming it's a multiplex, there's a lot of expertise that goes into running and looking after a multiplex.
Oh yeah.
And this is being left to volunteers?
Not quite. So and I think you had a second part of your first question. I feel like this is getting into it a little bit, but why am I excited about it? Or
Yeah.
why is this like something that I think is so relevant right now? So first of all, community land trusts, actually taking another step back, they've been in existence around the world for a long time. And actually some of them have been running for decades, like over 50 years. And through 50 years, they have actually proven to be a phenomenal model. Like some of the best and longest running land trusts in the world were started around New York City. They are still in one of the most expensive housing markets on the planet. They have grown and still provide, 50 years later, affordable housing in New York City. And New York City actually just recently announced that they're doing a $70 million reinvestment into some of their trusts because they're realizing how phenomenal these things are. So it's a proven model. It's actually, it might sound complex, but it really doesn't have to be. And a lot of the times it can be as simple, usually it's arrangements with entities that want to operate, that focus, their business is property management. The trust business is owning a portfolio of properties. So there's agreements that can be in place. And the other thing is there's a lot of flexibility in there. So it's hard to paint a picture of like this is a community land trust because you have some community land trusts, like some of the bigger ones, they own multiple properties. This one is a multi-story seniors housing with supports in it. This one is a small neighborhood that is for working parents, entry-level homes, and individual lots everywhere, right? This one could be actually supportive housing for people that are street entrenched, that are looking at transitioning, they need some support transitioning off the street. They can operate all of those in a portfolio of products that they offer, and a lot of them do. And also, some of them can be a co-op. They can actually be run more like a co-op. Some of them can be like actually purchase, an equity building model. Some of them can be rentals. So it's the magic of it is that the trust owns the land. The community owns a chunk of land for their benefit, not for anybody else's.
But you said it's a nonprofit.
Correct.
So if it's being used for rentals, isn't it making profit?
So nonprofits, so that's interesting. I just recently got in a discussion with somebody about this. Nonprofit does not mean can't make money. So this is something that people, it's a very common misconception. So I know a lot of nonprofits in Canada that make $100 million a year top line revenue. So what the designation of nonprofit means is it actually has rules around retaining profit and what you can do with profit. So you can't, like a corporation, you can't dividend profit out. You can't do things like that. And so and you can't retain a lot of earnings either with a nonprofit. There's rules around that as well. But so typically what nonprofits do is when they make a profit, they reinvest it into the purpose of the reason they are made. So these community land trusts, what they would do is they actually, when they start to accumulate more value, they go and they purchase more land for the community benefit. And they start to build out their portfolio of land. And so the reason I am so excited about this is because this is huge. This is a way that we could, in a very scalable way, make a huge impact on supply of housing right across Canada overnight without taxpayer dollars. What I hate right now is when we get these supportive housing projects or we get these affordable housing projects, it's like $150 million of taxpayer money for one project that's going to benefit like maybe, I don't know, 30 people or 100 people. That is not making a lick of difference in our problem. Like, I mean, it's scratching it's a scratch on the tail end of an elephant. Like, it's great that we're doing something. I applaud the fact that we're trying to take steps, but you need a way more scalable solution or actually make an impact. Like, have government's been doing this for decades? Has the price of your house gone down? Has the price of my house gone down? Absolutely not. And why do we keep doing the same thing? So we need a different approach. So one of the other interesting things is we've discovered, and it's actually well documented ever since World War II in lots of studies, land is a huge component of the price of a home, and it is actually one of the driving factors for home prices, actually, believe it or not. So how community land trust works is where people don't understand like the magic of it, because a lot of times I'll get questions, good questions of, well, what's affordable, right? Like, define affordable. And there is no answer to that. Like, affordable means something to every single different person on the planet. But how a community land trust makes every type of home more affordable is it takes land out of the equation. So when you look at let's say pick an average home in Kamloops, let's say it's $600,000. About $200,000 of that's the land right away. So we can take a $600,000 home, take land out of the picture, and we can now sell that home for $400,000. It's instantly more affordable. If it's a $3 million home, maybe the land is $500,000 of that. Well, now you can get that $3 million home for $2.5 million. It's more affordable. If it's a $200,000 quadplex, it's the same thing. So what happens is when we transact with a land trust, the land trust always owns the land, and you are only buying and selling the home that's on top of the land, because the community actually owns land forever.
Okay, now I have way more questions, which we're going to get to in a second, right after we take a break for some messages from our sponsors. I've got a lot of questions.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
We'll be right back after these messages.
In Kamloops, we're not just lawyers, we're forward law. We're about moving you forward. Approachable, caring, and experienced. That's who we are. From contract writing to estate planning, civil litigation to employment law, whatever your need, we've got your back. We push for fair resolutions. We're not afraid to take on the tough cases. Forward-thinking estate planning, strong advocacy, and unwavering support. Forward Law, your partner in progress. Call us today, because your future deserves nothing less. Welcome to the heart of business in Kamloops, Southgate Business Center, your one-stop destination for all your office needs. Conveniently located at 970 Laval Crescent, Southgate Business Center offers more than just office space. Whether you're a startup, a freelancer, or a well-established business, we've got you covered. Need a professional office space? Our offices provide the ideal environment for productivity and success. Planning a meeting or presentation? Elevate your business with our conference room available for rent. At Southgate Business Center, we understand the importance of efficiency. Our secretarial services ensure you have the support you need so you can focus on what matters most, growing your business. For office rentals, conference rooms, secretarial services, and more, contact Southgate Business Center at 250-374-9233 or visit us at 970 Laval Crescent in Kamloops. Southgate Business Center, your destination for success in the heart of Kamloops. Call us today and experience a new level of business excellence.
Welcome back to the Crisis Storm, and we're talking to Colin O'Leary about affordable housing and community land trusts. Colin, before the break, you had a lot of really interesting things to say, which made it even maybe a little bit more complicated. But if it is as you're suggesting, that we're taking the land out of the equation, and now a housing is more affordable, are you suggesting that banks are going to give mortgages for homes where the land is not owned?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting angle. So a lot of what happens, so first of all, the banks can still own the building on top of the land. So there's still collateral there. there's some security over the structure itself of a land trust and knowing that it's got covenants on it where the land can't just disappear. There's actually a lot of checks and balances around it, recapture tax, all sorts of other things. So there's ways of getting that kind of mortgage and financing happening, but a lot of the times what happens is that those buildings are actually usually run differently by an organization that actually operates the building, usually is into property management, sometimes is actually a developer that actually just wants to develop the buildings. And so they've got some of their own financing usually involved or interlinked in it in some ways. And one of the things that an interesting kind of model that can come out of this, so some land trusts, when they get big enough, they can actually almost like vendor finance some of it as well. Because a lot of the people, and again, we're talking about very big different like groups of people here. So some of the people are eligible, they can easily access financing, some of them can't. And so so some land trusts actually are the lenders when they get big enough to be able to kind of support people to get into something like this. So it's a very kind of complex answer, I guess, on that front, and it really depends on how it's operating, who's operating it, what it looks like. You know, something though that you bring up that makes me think of is that I feel compelled to also say that, you know, sometimes I've had like home builders that look at the idea of a community land trust and like, let's talk about building a freestanding house in a land trust, because it can be a bunch of things, but let's just stick to that model. They look at that and they actually initially are kind of opposed to the idea because they think that they're getting told to like, you know, take a hit or build the home for free or something like that. And I've been able to find some of these people, it's actually quite funny, like within a matter of about 5 minutes of answering questions, they go from totally opposed to the idea to like, we had this one guy in Ontario, he's like, I'll be the face of this. Like, put me out there, I will talk about this. But the idea is that why it's not a losing situation for a home builder is that they don't have to buy the land either. So you can actually have, let's say we have a land trust owns a parcel of land, they're going to turn it into a small sub-development, like sub-community. And they got all these different little lots there. A builder can come in, and now the builder doesn't have to pay for the land and can just build the home on that lot. Well, the builder can still charge their usual markup of, let's say, 15% or 12%, whatever it is. They can make their full profit on that home. And again, what would have been like a $600,000 home in our market with the land, now it's actually only a $400,000 home, but they've made the full percentage markup they'd make anyways on that $400,000 home, and it's still only $400,000 for the people buying it. So we're not asking builders to take a hit on it. They can make full markup on their homes. It becomes more affordable because the builder doesn't have to buy the land, and the people buying the property don't have to pay for the land either. It just takes the land out of the equation. So it's actually, you can get, like, you know, it doesn't have to be this nonprofit building organizations building these buildings. It can actually be developers and they can make a normal living off it.
So for those that are looking at this as a potential solution for affordable housing, how does it compare to, you know, like a strata or like purchasing a home on leased land from the reserve?
Yep. Again, lots of structures of how it can operate, but so sometimes, depending on the development and what it looks like on a land trust, because you can build all sorts of different developments on the land trust. The magic of a land trust is just removing the land from the equation. So sometimes there is a strata. There could be a strata involved. I think most of the time there isn't, but it could be a possibility depending if it's like a specialized community and they need that with common grounds, right? If we look at actually like home ownership, so this is a great segue into something that I think is also a key thing to highlight. It is like buying a home on reserve land with a lease. So the people buying it don't buy the land. They only buy the home. And it's kind of similar to like a lease on reserve land. But one of the neat things that happens is when they get into these arrangements, a lot of times actually they can be 99-year lease in structure. They usually, because land trusts want to solve this problem of affordable housing, they are not there to make money. They're there to be a benefit to the whole community. So what they do is they oftentimes get into arrangements with the people buying it where they say, it's kind of like the Habitat for Humanity kind of model, where they're like, we're going to make a deal that 50% when you go to sell it, it's going to appraise because everything always appraises. We have inflation, everything's always going to go up. You will have an opportunity, you homeowner who's buying this thing are going to have an opportunity to build equity. So we're going to make a deal that when you go to sell this, you get to keep 50% of the equity, and the other 50% you're going to kick back to the land trust. And we're going to use that money to run and to also acquire more land. But it gives people a chance to build equity. And here's the thing, in Canada, Canadians don't really have savings accounts right now. It's bad. Like we are so leveraged to death. How most Canadians are building wealth these days is through home equity. So a land trust actually allows a person to get out of the renting loop, the renting cycle, afford a home, and actually build equity, and that enables them to go out and actually enter into the normal housing market after that. So there's a great study that was done, again, down in the US, the large land trust, and they have actually proven clearly with data over years that they are not just like, providing housing for people that stay in there the rest of their life. They're actually cycling people through their units, and they're getting them out of the treadmill of renting, and they're helping them to build enough equity to buy their own home and like be able to actually be paying into a mortgage and building wealth. It transitions people through. We are taking people off this treadmill of just making banks richer.
So this sounds like it's a fantastic solution. It's been in place for decades. It's been proven. It's been in Canada for decades.
Yeah.
Why aren't we seeing more of it like by now? Why is it taking so long?
So this comes down to, and again, this is all the volunteer work I've been doing actually through the Chamber of Commerce with policy. I love policy development, but it's a funny story. So my father actually started the Calgary Community Land Trust back in the 90s. He also started a land trust, I think, in Montreal, and I think there's one in Vernon, I think he started. He did all as volunteer as well, by the way. And he was on a task force in Alberta to try to end homelessness in Alberta, and did amazing things when he was working that. And so they looked around the world back then, and they're like, what's a model that works around the world that we can replicate? They stumble across these land trusts. They're working in the US, and again, they're winning awards everywhere right now, if you look at them. And they're like, why don't we do that in Canada? So they started the Calgary Community Land Trust, all these other ones. And what they realized soon after starting these, and we got land trusts right across Canada, and I've talked to pretty much all of them. What we realized, or what they realized, is that there's a tax problem in Canada that doesn't exist in the United States and a lot of other countries around the world. So right now, most land trusts, when they start off, they are beholden to acts of philanthropy. Donations of land is what they need to get going. That's to kickstart them and get them going. So they started the Calgary Community Land Trust, and they're looking for land donations. And what they found pretty quickly is that the way tax laws in Canada, and I talk to people across Canada that want to do this and are not making donations to land trusts because of this problem. If you made a donation to, let's say you wanted to like donate this building to a community land trust for community good, and corporations as well. Corporations have land, they're underutilized, they're not utilizing them, they're on they're sitting on their books, they can offload them off their books maybe for a good public good. If you make this donation right now, you're going to owe capital gains tax on that donation. And because housing and land is appreciated so much in Canada, 95% of the time, if you've owned a property for longer than 5 years, pretty much anywhere in Canada, you're actually the tax owing is more than the tax credit, the charitable receipt you're going to get back for that donation. So you're going to come along, you're going to give away this building for free, so you're already out the value of the building, and now you owe the CRA a whole bunch of tax as well for doing that. So right now in Canada, people are like, forget that. I'm not giving up an asset and owing tax to our government. This is nuts. So nobody's making any land donations. They want to, and they literally, like, sometimes there's, people come into property they're not using. There's a bunch of reasons. End of the career, they're land barons, they want to like downsize, or corporations that acquired land ages ago and they're really not using it, and it's in a perfect place to put some housing. They don't want to crystallize that capital gains tax. So it's going to sit there unused on their books because they don't want to give up that asset and owe money. They can't justify that. So my policy, what it actually looks to do is it looks to mirror something that's already been in existence in Canada since 2006, and it's called the Ecological Gift Program. And what that policy says, what is...
This is a policy where, Colin?
So sorry, this is actually a component, it was a policy, it was legislated into law, and it is in the Income Tax Act of Canada. So right now, today, if a corporation or an individual has a chunk of land that they want to donate for ecological purposes, they can make that donation and the government will give them a tax credit for the value of that donation, and they'll make it capital gains exempt. And the quote at the time is the government was doing this to create a powerful incentive for the donation of land for ecological purposes.
So the president was set with that.
That's right. And we can look at it and we can say, okay, well, was that effective? They did a check. So between 2006 and when was it? Like 2013, I think it was. They did a little gut check to see how it was doing. Over $1 billion worth of land was donated in Canada using this mechanism. So it is working. It is working well.
And this is land that's being donated to like Ducks Unlimited or the Grasslands Conservancy Society or places like this.
You got it. You got it. And the beauty of it is because it's been around for a while, they've really closed any kind of tax loopholes. It's airtight. You can't abuse it to get out of paying tax. Like it is very robust with anti-avoidance rules is what they call it. So what we're doing what I am proposing with my policy through the chamber is the best policy stuff where you don't have to make government stretch way too far outside the box, because if you do that, they'll never do it. So you take something that they can wrap their head around, you tweak it a little, and that's the best policy I find. So what I said is, let's take the Ecological Gift Program, let's mirror it. It's the same mechanisms. What we're going to say is, if a person or corporation donates land to a community land trust for affordable housing, that donation can be capital gains exempt and they get the tax credit, just like the Eco Gift Program. And now all of a sudden, there is a huge incentive for individuals and corporations right across Canada to donate land to these community land trusts and populate them with amazing land. And you can ask the question, well, is that really a thing? I can tell you right now, we had talks with Domtar Canada at one point before Kruger kind of moved in here, and they were extremely interested in this. We talked to, had friends who were talking to LNG companies in Kitimat. They were like, what a great way to help out the community. I've talked to people, there was a fellow in Halifax, and his whole career was owning property. And he had amassed a whole bunch of property. He's getting the end of his kind of working life. He was looking at downsizing and retiring. He owned a couple big towers downtown Halifax. They're filled with seniors, and he hadn't upped their rent in ages. And he was like, he wanted to give these properties to a land trust. There's a land trust there in Halifax. They wanted to take the properties. But what was happening was he was just like, I can't, it makes no sense for me to donate, give up the huge value of these assets and then owe an unbelievable amount of tax on top of that. It's just absolutely insane. I would love to give this over. And so they looked at the idea of him selling it at a huge discount to the community land trust. But that actually creates a massive liability for the community land trust, because now the book value of that property is way down there. And so there could be huge tax liability if something did ever actually end up happening to that. And he didn't want to just sell it, because if he sold it, he knew that all those seniors would get rent evicted. But you know what? People like that who have amassed a lot of wealth like that at the end of their career, what are they looking for? It would be great for their tax planning purposes if they could get a tax credit. That's why you see a lot of these individuals have business schools named after them, for example, and hospital wings. So he would, in a second, donate both of those towers to Community Land Trust if our policy was in place. And so that is how this is scalable right across Canada. Is actually, it doesn't take a dime of taxpayer money to do that. We could overnight, if we allowed this legislation to happen, we would have land donations without costing any taxpayers anything right across the country. Huge land donations that could be used for affordable housing. We're going to free up piles of unused land or land that would otherwise just be sold on the market for affordable housing. We're going to bump that supply through the roof, instantly in a hugely scalable way. That is the absolute magic of this thing. And then not only that, we remember the earlier comment I made about like one of our biggest problems is that we are actually actively eroding our affordable housing supply with everything we're doing right now. Land trusts stop that because we own that land for the community good forever. We are preserving affordable housing. We're not eroding it anymore. So not only are we dramatically increasing the supply of affordable housing without costing billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, we are also stopping the erosion of the supply we have. And to top it off, it will actually be good for our economy because corporations that have this land that's unused, been sitting on their books forever, they can actually take that, the value of that land, and they can take that tax offset and they can apply it to their other operations. Right. It actually makes good business sense for them to do this, to offload unused property. And they can actually, they get a bit of a bonus out of it as well. It's a win on all three sides. It's a win for government. It's a win for the people in the affordable housing. It's a win for the people donating or the corporations or the individuals donating.
So where does this policy sit now for us to be able to realize this this incredible opportunity?
So right now, it's been 5 years of of working on this, and I think part of the problem is that it's people aren't familiar with the land trust, and then the policy is fairly complex. Like I actually went through like the 6,000 pages of the Income Tax Act, which is a patchwork of nightmare, and actually even put forward all the revisions required by the government. They would have to look at it themselves. I'm just trying to make it easy for them, but I think because that complexity, it's easy for people at the face value to not understand it and think that, you know, it's a way that developers are going to get rich or the rich are going to get richer, which is not true at all. They have to give up land. So there's people feel like I get that it's too good to be true almost. And so getting it in front of the decision makers to actually look at it, whenever somebody has sat down and actually looked through it, we've had national tax lawyers look through it, and they're just like, this is brilliant. I've had the federal housing minister run through it. I've met with him 2 times now, and he's just been like, this is exactly what we need. But it's a tax policy. It's not a housing policy at its core. So I've been chasing down Chrystia Freeland, who's the federal finance minister, also the deputy prime minister, and probably the busiest person in all of Canada. And so I've been trying to chase her down, and through that process, we did a national petition, and we got support across Canada. I got the support from Land Trust across Canada, support from the Canadian Land Trust Network, you name it, support from donors, support from all sorts of people, and we got enough support through that policy had to be tabled in the House of Commons, and the Chrystia Freeland had to write a response to it, and so we got a letter. I got a letter from Chrystia. And she basically addressed, she's like, this is a very important topic, and we are actively looking for solutions. And this is a very interesting idea, is effectively where she left it off. But what we need this legislated into law. And what I'm trying to push is that this is not going to be a silver bullet. There's never a silver bullet. We need a spectrum of solutions. This is one of the solutions amongst other solutions. So right now, the policy made it verbatim into the Conservative Party platform the last election, which might have possibly actually been maybe even detrimental because the Liberals got into power.
I was just going to ask you, is this something that's appealing from a nonpartisan standpoint, or is this just one party that is?
So Peter, this is what our push is right now. I think this is absolutely nonpartisan. I don't want it linked to a single party. This is all parties can agree affordable housing is an issue. And the Liberals, just so happened our MP was conservative. He brought it to his shadow housing minister, who thought it was the most novel idea he has seen I think ever in his time. And that's why I think it made it into their platform. But I wanted in the Liberal party platform. I wanted in the NDP party platform. I wanted in everybody's platform. Because if it's in everybody's platform, it doesn't matter who becomes government, there's a chance that this could get legislated into law. So it's literally, we just have to get it in front of the decision makers, and we need them to just take a look at it and realize what it is. And it's time for Canada to catch up with the rest of the world on land trust, community land trust.
Well, you've mentioned the States several times. You mentioned New York quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right after the break, I want to ask you a little bit more about that and about how it's happening and working in other places. So we're going to do one last break, and then we're going to wrap up with some more thoughts from you on affordable housing and community land trusts. We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
After these messages from our sponsors.
In Kamloops, we're not just lawyers, we're forward law. We're about moving you forward. Approachable, caring, and experienced. That's who we are. From contract writing to estate planning, civil litigation to employment law, whatever your need, we've got your back. We push for fair resolutions. We're not afraid to take on the tough cases. Forward-thinking estate planning, strong advocacy, and unwavering support. Forward Law, your partner in progress. Call us today, because your future deserves nothing less. Welcome to the heart of business in Kamloops, Southgate Business Center, your one-stop destination for all your office needs. Conveniently located at 970 Laval Crescent, Southgate Business Center offers more than just office space. Whether you're a startup, a freelancer, or a well-established business, we've got you covered. Need a professional office space? Our offices provide the ideal environment for productivity and success. Planning a meeting or presentation? Elevate your business with our conference room available for rent. At Southgate Business Center, we understand the importance of efficiency. Our secretarial services ensure you have the support you need so you can focus on what matters most, growing your business. For office rentals, conference rooms, secretarial services, and more, contact Southgate Business Center at 250-374-9233 or visit us at 970 Laval Crescent in Kamloops. Southgate Business Center, your destination for success in the heart of Kamloops. Call us today and experience a new level of business excellence.
And welcome back for our final segment of talking with Colin O'Leary about affordable housing and this unique concept of a community land trust being used to help to solve that or be one of the solutions that might help. So Colin, community land trusts, how does this relate, or does it even relate to the recent announcement that our Premier put out there with regards to the $900 million for putting rental housing on underused public lands?
Yeah, it's so applicable. And yeah, it was $950 million recent announcement. And I think the government's realizing land is obviously, they're realizing, this is very telltale, that land is a critical component of our problem or what we need to address when we're tackling affordable housing. So I love that they've gone there. And the idea of using underutilized public land is not a far stretch from the concept of a community land trust. So I immediately had a knee-jerk reaction. I tried to send messages out through some contacts I have with the government to try to say to the Premier and Ravi Kahlon, Housing Minister, provincially, like, do you guys realize that a community land trust would be an ideal vehicle to actually hold this land for the purposes that they're talking about? Because I think that logistically, they might see some challenges when they're trying to make this happen at a municipal level with provincial land. And again, the community land trust is a perfect kind of model, and it would operate, even if they didn't use a community land trust, what this thing would probably end up, this concept, the way it would end up operating would be almost identical to a community land trust. So why not put it into a trust? And it's a great idea, but I think that they're realizing that, land, again, is intrinsically related to the cost or intrinsically related to affordable housing. And by making more land available like this and unlocking, we have so much underutilized land that exists right now, either through private ownership or through corporate ownership, business ownership. That's the magic of the policy I'm looking at pushing, is that it's unlocking that land for the community benefit. And so I think there's a surprising amount of synergy and alignment there. And I just don't know if they thought of the actual logistical mechanism of doing what they're saying they want to do. And I just think it would marry beautifully with the community land trust. Set up a community land trust in every community in BC. I think it's a trend that's actually starting to happen already.
About that, so I asked you earlier about, you know, is it, you know, is the city, you know, doing a land trust? Are they the ones that are going to own the land? And you said no, it's the community. So, you know, here in Kamloops, I'm trying to wrap my head around. The city recently made an announcement too, and they announced that they're setting up a community land trust foundation. Can you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, so I think that, like, I love that our city is innovative and embracing this kind of idea, and you know, I might have had a bit of influence there with them kind of formulating this idea. Although I've got to give full credit. Very independently, I was started coming across this idea of land trust and how this could be a novel solution before COVID, and I was friends with the director of finance, I think was the title back in the day. And we were grabbing a coffee, and I found out that the city had also kind of stumbled across this idea on their own. So some people give me the credit of like having the idea, bringing the idea to the city. I wouldn't say that's entirely true. They did staff found it on their own, which is, I applaud them. I did have a lot of counselors when they were running wanted to grab coffee with me, and of course I was expounding the virtues of community land trust to them, and I think we saw that with like the unanimous support of council for our policy. And so I think what they're doing is they are taking a very municipal approach to this. So a lot of community land trusts are actually started in community in Canada. So if we look at the Kensington Community Land Trust, is actually a really good example in Canada. It's a successful community land trust. It's based in Ontario, and I've talked to them a fair amount, and they have great resources on how to start a community land trust, what it looks like. They've created workbooks on it for other people that want to do this stuff. And so they started from the community level up. So City Council is taking a different kind of approach. And so, but I like that the city wants to be proactive and recognizes the value of this. But I think the strategy with them, and I don't know for sure, so I can't, this is my opinion here, I should say, is that they want to kickstart this thing. They want to make sure it gets good legs under it. And in doing so, I think there's kind of like a bit of a stepping stone strategy with it, where they are initially kind of setting it up, having like their hand in there and kind of figuring it out. And then I think the idea is to actually start to slowly get more community driven kind of like structure to it. And so I think we see that right now when there was actually a call for board of directors from the community. So they were looking at applications out there for people to apply to be a director on the Kamloops Community Land Trust. So they're in that process right now.
Foundation.
Well, right now it's a foundation, but I speculate, I'm not sure that it's going to be transitioning into more of like a traditional community land trust maybe down the road. I don't know how far down the road, but I think it's this like, because the city kind of wants to nurture this and start this, I think their idea is to kind of go that direction. But we'll see. And it could be actually ultimately the decision of the new board of directors when they get pulled together.
Do you think we might see some land from the city of Kamloops being donated into?
I think there could definitely be a possibility of that. And you know, and maybe they had a bit of, maybe they knew what was coming down the pipe from EB provincially, right? And if they did, that's a very smart move of them, because now they've got a vehicle, but ahead of a lot of other communities, to actually like accept this land from the province. And you know, a lot of municipalities do have underutilized land. So like they might also see these transitions and see opportunities, but that could definitely be a possibility. But what I also liked with their approach is that, you know, we have some land trusts in the province right now that actually do have large amounts of land. There's the Vancouver Land Trust, actually has some huge chunks of land and are providing affordable housing in downtown Vancouver, very high price market. And what we're seeing right now is that they are able to do that without my policy. And people are saying, well, how come it's working for them? How are they doing it? But if you look at it, all of their land donations have been from government, like BC Hydro, for example, Crown corporations or government.
Where there was no capital gains
There is
hit.
That's exactly it. There is no capital gains tax. That's how those things are able to happen. So, you know, the beauty though of having this model and having the policy, if it becomes legislated into law, like if we have this community land trust in Kamloops, and maybe this is a vehicle to kind of, in the meantime, access some of this land from EB. If we set it up right, which is kind of where I've been trying to kind of having some influence over the city, and I think they've been listening. If we set this up right, we could also make it that if this becomes, my policy becomes law, they could also accept private donations, corporate and individual donations, which is it's a win on all fronts. Mm-hmm. And so, so I think they definitely, there's a plan there, and there's been some, and again, I don't want to speculate, but there has been some like kind of public announcements, and it sounds like there might be some opportunities to have some parcels to kick this thing off, possibly, whether from EB or who knows where.
Earlier you were talking about, you know, some global examples of how this is being used and is successful and innovative in solving a lot of problems on a global scale. But we only really talked a little bit about Canada and the US. Is there any examples of how this is being used globally that you think are worth sharing?
Absolutely. So first of all, I would say that actually in the UK, another like around London, for example, extremely expensive kind of marketplace, they've been using community land trust for decades. And actually, there's some people I know in town who actually are from, one person in particular, and he's in construction, and he's from the UK, and he has literally sat on boards of community land trusts over there, and he's like, they're brilliant, they work awesome, like we're able to use, if we can make them work in London, we can make them work just about anywhere. So lots of examples in London. I want to say from memory there is well over 100 different community land trusts just in the UK alone. There was there's an international award that comes out and kind of recognizes, kind of like a Nobel Peace Prize sort of style, but it recognizes like projects around the world that are really innovative and solving problems, unique problems. And actually in Madrid, not too long ago, there was a community land trust that won that award. And what they found is that there was actually some Indigenous kind of people in this area, and it was a unique kind of landscape area, and there's a lot of pollution also there, and they actually created a community land trust that was able to enable these Indigenous kind of, or intrinsic people to access housing. Housing was a problem for them. A lot of them were homeless, so they can access housing, and they actually found it was also a way to rehabilitate some of the garbage and clean up kind of the area of land around the housing as well. And so it was really unique kind of idea, very successful. Mexico has rolled out some community land trusts, they're pretty incredible. South America has a bunch of them that are phenomenal. Besides the UK, there's a lot in the rest of Europe. Like, they've been around for a while, and they're, again, that's the beauty of it, is they are a proven mechanism. We're not coming up with something where we're like, well, we don't know if this is actually going to work or not. No, we know these will work.
It's almost like we are trailing behind the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, and you know, there was an article again that came out, I think it was in the Globe or New York Times, where somebody was noticing, so the number of community land trusts, again, this is more United States centric, but the number of community land trusts in the US has doubled in the last 5 years. And there's these comments that basically people are rediscovering this gem we always had in our backyard, and we kind of forgot about it. It's this hidden thing that we always kind of knew about, and it wasn't so much a problem back when it first came out. And now they're realizing that that was the perfect solution all along, and we kind of forgot about them.
It's interesting when you talk about this being really successful in the US, because, I mean, I don't like to put labels on things. I think I'm a little bit of everything, but community land trusts strike me as a little bit of a socialist type of mechanism.
Sure.
And the US is definitely not a socialist society.
Yeah.
So it strikes me as maybe a little humorous, maybe a little ironic, that something that is solving a significant problem in the US is actually a socialist mechanism.
It is unique, but here maybe we'll tie it back to the capitalists. So when we look, putting on my chamber hat or putting on my economic developers hat all throughout the province, labor is a major problem in every industry right now in our province and across Canada. And what is one of the number one driving factors affecting labor availability? Affordable housing. So if you actually think about it, by if a community has access to affordable housing, we're able to attract, that is a huge asset, community building asset. And we're able to actually attract people into our community that are now looking for work. We are actually very much helping our economy. We're helping our capitalists, we're helping our businesses, because people are desperate for labor right now. So, and not only that, look at, the amazing kind of brains and intellect that are coming into Canada from around the world right now with a lot of international students. When we want to keep them here, we need to be able to make sure that we can provide them with affordable housing, or else what's going to happen is we can't keep them here. We get them here for education and then they can't afford to live here and they leave. So we could, by having this pool of affordable housing, we can actually capitalize on that brain, like that knowledge bank that's coming into our country as well. And it's not just like, should also say, it's not just like entry level, like kind of skills or entry level sort of stuff. I do a lot of work with my volunteer time with doctors and solving a lot of problems in actually primary healthcare.
I was going to bring up steps, but I was holding back from that. But
maybe that's a whole other episode. Who knows?
It could be, because healthcare is a crisis in our community as well.
That is another whole like audacious kind of crazy animal, isn't it? But I'm super proud of what we've done with steps. But to keep it to housing in this episode, I will say that actually doctors can even struggle to find affordable housing. Like I have a friend who's an anesthesiologist in Vancouver, and he can barely afford his house. And a specialist doctor in North Van, and it's like we got a problem if like we have, some of the highest paid positions in Canada can't afford a home.
Like you said, putting something like affordable housing in place frees up housing inventory, and we can then start to attract doctors so that we don't have 15,000 people, 20,000 people in Kamloops don't have doctors.
50,000?
50,000 people
are unattached in our catchment area. Oh, that's a whole other thing, Peter.
Half the population don't have a family doctor.
Yep. I've been on wait lists for over 10 years. Like, there's a whole other thing there. But again, back to the housing thing, look at what Whistler did during like the Olympics. There's some of that stuff was, some people had negative impacts with like some of the things that happened with the 2010 Winter Olympics. But what Whistler actually did is the municipality provided and built a pile of housing for workers. They needed workers. Yeah. And that's how they were able to actually attract them up there. And that's how they were able to do the things they were doing. It was actually linked to housing the workers. And then the other thing is, if you look at it, if we're looking at freeing up chunks of land that are underutilized right now, think of the revitalization this can drive in a community. So instead of having all these brown fields, these derelict lots that have had for lease on them for years and years and years, you can actually have redevelopment happening in these areas. You can have new projects coming in, and when we're doing new construction projects, guess what? Builders, tradespeople, there's money involved. People get to make money. People get to, have a job. They get to bring money home to their family. They get to spend the money in the local stores, the grocery stores, and you get that, the direct, indirect, and induced economic benefits in a community where that money circles around up to 5 times in some communities when you drive stuff like this. So there's huge other benefits, and housing is linked to a lot of these things, but like it's one of those foundational pieces to a community, and that's why I think it is so critically important we figure this problem out, because Canada's a great country, and we're a bunch of smart people, and we have a lot going for us as far as land and resources. Why are we letting this stuff happen? We can fix this. There are solutions.
Wrap us up with an answer to one more question.
Sure, fire away.
Misconceptions. There's got lots of misconceptions out there, lots of misinformation and misconceptions. If you could change a major misconception that's out there right now as it relates to affordable housing, or even community land trusts, what is that misconception you want people to realize?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's a lot that's there, but you know, if we bring back to the community land trust stuff, I mean, one of the biggest problems we have with it is that it's one of those like it's too good to be true, what's the catch? Like that, and then people don't understand it that way. And what I will say is that people think this is set up to make the rich richer, like the idea of this policy, and it's so far from the truth. So if I could set that straight right now, I would say, you know, if people look at it very superficially, they sometimes I'll get comments that are, you know, developers are going to get rich off this. They don't have to pay tax or something along those lines, which the policy says nothing along those lines. Or, you know, oh, great, so all these like rich corporations and people with money, they're going to benefit because they're going to get the tax credit from it. Like, you know, people who don't own land, they don't get the tax credit. But it's a very funny way of looking at this, because if you think about it, the people who are donating the land, it's still philanthropy. They are not net ahead. They are actually giving up a chunk of land. So, like, you know, I've had some people who are...
and they're literally giving it away, not selling it.
That's right. Giving it away. It is not sales. It is giving. So
it's worth something on their books, and now it's gone.
That's right. That's right. And with our policy, they will get a tax credit equivalent of it, but they're not ahead. And the tax credit a lot of times does not actually equate to the full value of what something is, because it's an offset, right? And you go into tax law. But anyways, so that's something that's a huge misconception. And in the flip side, I've had some people who have like own a lot of land, own a lot of money, and they're like, well, why would I ever do this? Like, I'm not net ahead. And it's like, yeah, you're right. You're not net ahead. This is philanthropy. You are making a donation. It's a good incentive for you to make a donation, but you're doing this for the public good. So it doesn't make the rich richer, and in actual fact, it mostly benefits the people who have not, because now they get access to something that wasn't being used for free. And you know what? Us taxpayers, we don't have to fund that either. So we benefit. The rich aren't the winners out of this. They get a bit of a win, but we get way more of a win. Us as taxpayers and as Canadians, people who run businesses that need labor, people who need a family doctor, people who want to see their community revitalized, we benefit. The people who are living without a home or are going to be renting their entire lives if something doesn't change, they benefit. So it's actually, they're the winners out of this, but that's one of the biggest misconceptions I will get. Especially as soon as you hear tax and you hear like, you know, corporations or, you know, individuals with lots of land. It's like, that's, again, the misconception. The rich get richer and they're like, this is just going to benefit them. Not the case.
Colin, thank you for joining us on the Crisis Storm Show. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about community land trusts or some of the things that Colin has told us about today, we'll include some links and further descriptions of this in our description on our YouTube version of the Crisis Storm for this episode. And if you are looking for information after listening to it on some of our podcast platforms, feel free to go to findingawayforward.com. Thank you for joining the Crisis Storm. We'll see you next time. You're watching or listening to the Crisis Storm. Many would say that there is a crisis on our streets in Kamloops and in cities across North America. Homelessness, addictions, and social impacts affect business, community, and individuals every day. Crisis Storm is a longer format episodic video series and audio podcast series that digs into the root causes of our street and social displacements through conversations with thought leaders, responders, and solution finders in the hope that we can inform and engage better conversations around these crises that are dividing and polarizing our community. All of us at the Crisis Storm podcast would like to thank our sponsors for their support and care for the community of Kamloops and its residents. Southgate Business Center and Forward Law are two such sponsors that deserve your consideration. If you found value in this episode of Crisis Storm, please don't forget to give us a like and share with others. Thank you for joining the conversation and being part of the solution to the many crises that we face in our community. Crisis Storm is a production of Mastermind Studios in association with the AIMCanada Mentorship Society. For more information on the Crisis Storm podcast series and the documentary film project titled Finding a Way Forward, please visit findingawayforward.com. Crisis Storm can be watched on YouTube, along with listening to the audio versions on many podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts, and RSS. If you've got questions for the producers of this show or suggestions on topics and guests for future shows, please send them to info@mastermindstudios.ca.